I decided to go camping alone. It wasn't my first time, and I had everything planned out. I picked a spot deep in the woods, far from any main trails or campsites. I wanted isolation, peace, and a break from the noise of everyday life. The forecast was clear, my backpack was filled with supplies, and my knife was sharp. Everything should have been fine. I parked my truck on a dirt road, miles from the main highway, and hiked for about an hour into the dense forest. The trees were thick, towering above me, their branches interlocking to create a canopy that barely let sunlight through. The ground was uneven, covered in damp leaves, broken twigs, and the occasional patch of exposed roots. The air smelled fresh, mixed with the scent of wet earth and pine. It was the perfect spot. No signs of human activity, no noise but the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. I set up my tent in a small clearing next to a stream, thinking it would be convenient to have fresh water nearby. I collected some firewood and got a small fire going before sunset. I cooked a simple meal, sat back, and enjoyed the solitude. The sounds of the forest at night were different from the daytime. Owls hooted in the distance, insects hummed in an endless rhythm, and the occasional snap of a branch made me glance into the darkness. But it was nothing unusual, just the forest being the forest. I went to sleep feeling calm, the distant crackling of the fire fading as I dozed off. But at some point in the night, I woke up. Something wasn't right. The fire had died down, leaving only faint embers glowing in the pit. But that wasn't what woke me. It was a sound, a deep, deliberate crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves. I held my breath, listening. My mind raced. Could be a deer, maybe a raccoon scavenging for food. But something felt off. The steps were slow, careful, like someone trying not to make noise but failing just enough for me to notice. My hand reached for my knife. I stayed still, my heart pounding in my chest. Then silence. Nothing moved. No wind. No footsteps. Just the distant sound of the stream. I stayed like that for what felt like hours before exhaustion took over, and I drifted back to sleep, my hand still gripping the handle of my knife. Morning came, and I stepped out of my tent, scanning the area. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints, no signs of anything unusual. Maybe I had imagined it. I spent the day exploring, hiking deeper into the woods, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let go of that feeling from the night before. That night, I made sure to keep the fire burning longer. I sat beside it, staring into the flames, listening. The forest was alive with sounds again. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, trees creaking. But then, sometime past midnight, I heard it again. A single snap of a twig. Not close, but not far either. Just out of sight. Then another. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness. The fire's light didn't reach far, and beyond it, everything was just shadows and silhouettes of trees. I picked up my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise. Nothing, just trees and darkness. I held my breath, listening. Then, another step. Closer. I stood up, my knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, shining it frantically around me. Still nothing, but the feeling in my gut told me someone was out there, watching. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed awake, gripping my knife, staring into the dark, waiting for something, anything, to move. But nothing ever did. The next morning, I decided to pack up early. I didn't feel safe anymore. I had camped alone plenty of times, but this felt different. Like I wasn't alone out here, like I was being hunted. As I took down my tent, I noticed something. The dirt near the edge of my campsite had been disturbed. Footprints, human, barefoot. A cold chill ran down my spine. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been out there, circling my camp while I slept. I moved fast, packing up my gear, constantly looking over my shoulder. The walk back to my truck felt like the longest hike of my life. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made my heart pound. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, tossing my gear into the back and locking the doors the second I got inside. As I started the engine and turned onto the dirt road, I looked back once, just to be sure, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees, watching me.
No clothes.
Just pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. I didn't wait. I floored the gas, speeding down the dirt road until I reached the highway. I didn't stop, didn't breathe until I was miles away. I don't know who or what that was. Maybe some deranged hermit living in the woods. Maybe something worse. I'll never know. All I know is I'm never camping alone again. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again. I never really thought about it much before this trip. I mean, I had camped a lot growing up, spent time in the woods with my dad, with friends, even alone a couple of times when I wanted some peace. But this trip, it was different. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural, but it was real, and that's what makes it so much worse. I had planned this trip for months. The idea was simple: head out into the woods, deep enough that I wouldn't see another person for days, and just exist. No phone, no noise, no distractions. I wanted to prove to myself that I could still do it, that I could still be completely self-sufficient. I had all the supplies, all the knowledge. I had my tent, sleeping bag, plenty of food, and a way to purify water. I had a knife, a hatchet, even a gun. I thought I was prepared. The drive out took about 4 hours, most of it on back roads, until I reached the trailhead. I parked, locked up the truck, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started walking. The trail was quiet, peaceful, just the sound of birds, the wind in the trees, the occasional rustling in the underbrush as something small darted away. I felt good, strong, alive. After a few hours of hiking, I reached the spot I had marked on my map. It was perfect, a small clearing near a slow-moving creek, surrounded by thick trees on all sides. I set up camp, got a fire going, cooked some food. The first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire for a while, listened to the sounds of the forest, then crawled into my tent and fell asleep. The second day, I explored. I didn't wander too far, just enough to get a sense of the area. I found a few old game trails, saw some deer tracks, even spotted a fox at one point. I felt good, relaxed. That evening, I cooked another meal, sat by the fire again, and went to sleep. Then, things started to change. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something moving outside my tent. Not just the wind, not just an animal rustling in the leaves. Something deliberate. Slow, careful steps. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps stopped, and the forest went silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. That unnatural silence that makes your skin crawl. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I found tracks near my tent. Human tracks, barefoot. They circled my campsite and disappeared into the woods. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. Maybe a local who didn't like me being there. Maybe just some weirdo. But the tracks were fresh, and they hadn't been there the day before. I decided to stay alert but not panic. That day, I stuck closer to camp. I kept my gun on me, made sure the fire was going. As the sun started to set, I felt uneasy. I had that feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, even if you can't see them. I kept looking around, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. I kept the fire burning as long as I could, but eventually, I had to let it die down. I sat in my tent, gripping my knife, waiting, and then I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time, slow, careful. I wanted to shout, to scare whoever it was off, but something told me not to. Instead, I stayed completely still, barely even breathing. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear breathing, slow, steady breaths. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, fading into the woods. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun was up, I packed my gear. I didn't care about proving anything anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. But as I was packing, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My backpack had been moved, just slightly, but enough that I knew it wasn't me. And inside, my knife was missing. I didn't think. I just started walking. Fast. I didn't run, not yet, but I moved as quickly as I could. I kept my gun in my hand, safety off, finger resting near the trigger. The whole way back, I felt like I was being followed. Every now and then, I would stop and listen, but I never saw anything. Just that same horrible silence. Took me 3 hours to reach my truck. When I finally saw it, I nearly collapsed with relief. I threw my pack in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. I didn't even take a second to breathe before turning the key and speeding out of there. As I pulled onto the main road, I glanced in my rearview mirror, just for a second, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the tree line, watching me, tall, thin, completely still. And then, as I watched, it took a single step backward and disappeared into the trees. I don't know who they were. I don't know what they wanted, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I'm never going back. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a few days in the woods to clear my mind. I've always liked being alone, and the thought of disconnecting from everything was something I was looking forward to. But after what happened, I can't even think about being in the woods without feeling sick to my stomach. I had picked a spot deep in the national forest, far from the main campsites, where I wouldn't run into other people. I didn't want the sounds of other campers breaking the silence of nature. I wanted to be alone. I parked my truck on the side of a narrow dirt road, grabbed my gear, and hiked about 2 miles in before setting up camp by a small clearing near a stream. It was a perfect spot, flat ground, plenty of firewood, and the steady trickle of water nearby. I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up my tent, collecting wood, and making sure my food was hung up high in a tree away from animals. As the sun started setting, I made a small fire and cooked dinner. The woods were peaceful, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. I sat by the fire for hours, staring into the flames, enjoying the stillness. When I finally turned in for the night, I felt safe. I was alone, far from anyone, and nothing could bother me out here. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had pulled me out of a deep sleep. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving through the dry leaves just outside my tent. My body went stiff. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped. The woods were dead silent. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever, waiting to hear them again. But they didn't come. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon. I tried to go back to sleep, but it took a long time for my heart to stop pounding. The next morning, I searched the area around my campsite. I expected to find deer tracks or something small, but what I found made my stomach twist. There were footprints, human footprints. They circled my tent and led back into the woods. They weren't mine. I checked my own boot prints to be sure. Someone had been walking around my tent in the middle of the night, just standing there, listening, watching. I told myself it was probably a hunter or another camper who had gotten lost. Maybe they saw my fire and were trying to find their way back to the road. I didn't want to freak myself out, so I packed up my gear and decided to move a few miles deeper into the woods, just in case. By the time I set up my new camp, it was already late afternoon. I forced myself to stay calm. The new spot was better, denser trees harder to find. I told myself I was fine, but that night it happened again. I woke up to the same sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps. This time I didn't freeze. I reached for my knife and listened. The steps moved closer, then stopped right outside my tent. I could hear breathing, slow, steady breathing. Someone was standing just inches away from me, separated only by a thin layer of fabric. I gripped my knife so hard my hand started to shake. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening to whoever was outside. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps started again. They moved away, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep after that. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my gear and started hiking back to my truck. I was exhausted but pushed through. When I reached the road, I felt relieved, until I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were fresh footprints around my truck. Someone had been here waiting. I threw my gear into the truck and got in, locking the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled onto the dirt road, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees. But there was nothing. I drove straight home, not stopping once. When I finally got back, I sat in my truck for a long time, trying to process everything. I still don't know who was out there or what they wanted. I just know one thing for sure. I'll never go camping alone again. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. It wasn't my first solo camping trip, but it was the first time I was going this deep into the woods. I had studied the area on maps, watched videos about survival, and packed everything I thought I'd need. My plan was simple: hike deep into the forest, set up camp by a small river, spend a couple of nights, and then head back. A short escape from the noise of everyday life. The first day went smoothly. The hike was long, but I enjoyed the solitude. The trail was barely used, and the deeper I went, the more isolated I felt. That was the whole point. I wanted to be alone, to clear my mind, to test myself. By late afternoon, I found a good spot by the river, flat and dry, with plenty of space. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and cooked a simple meal. As the sun set, I sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of the forest. It wasn't until deep into the night that I woke up, feeling off. My body was still, but my mind was alert. Something had pulled me out of sleep. I listened carefully. The wind in the trees, the distant sound of the river, the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. Normal sounds. But something felt wrong. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me and forced myself to go back to sleep. The second day was uneventful. I spent most of it exploring, fishing, and gathering more firewood. The feeling from the night before stuck with me, though. Every so often, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The feeling wasn't fear exactly, more like the sense that I wasn't as alone as I should have been. That night, I built the fire up higher than usual. I cooked, ate, and stayed up later than planned, staring into the flames, listening to the forest. That was when I heard it, something moving in the distance. It wasn't the sound of a small animal. It was heavier, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, straining to hear. It stopped. Silence. Then, after a long moment, it started again. Closer. My heart pounded. I had bear spray and a knife, but I didn't like my chances if it was a predator. I stood up, shining my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, that the forest was full of sounds, that I was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept the fire burning high and didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. About 20 feet from my tent, The ground was disturbed. The dirt was scuffed up, the leaves pushed aside, and there, half covered by debris, were footprints. Human footprints, bare feet, large. I stared at them for a long time. My brain refused to process what I was looking at. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. This wasn't a popular hiking trail. It was miles from the nearest road. Even if someone had wandered out this far, why would they be barefoot? I packed up my camp faster than I ever had before. I wasn't going to wait around to find out who or what had been walking around my site. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my gut was screaming at me to get out. The hike back felt different. Every sound made me jump. I kept looking behind me, feeling like I was being followed. The footprints played over and over in my mind. By late afternoon, I made it back to my car. The relief I felt when I locked the doors was overwhelming. I told myself that it had just been a bad feeling, that maybe the footprints had been old, that I had let my imagination get the best of me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone out there, and whoever was out there had been watching me the whole time. I had been planning the camping trip for months. Just me, my gear, and the quiet of the forest. No phone, no emails, no noise from the city. I needed it. Work had been getting to me, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. A weekend alone in the mountains sounded like the perfect reset. I chose a remote spot deep in the national forest, far from the popular trails. It was a good hike in about 8 miles from where I parked my truck. The ranger at the station warned me that this part of the forest wasn't as maintained as the more traveled routes. He said there were old trails that faded out, animal activity was higher, and help wouldn't be easy to get if something went wrong. That's exactly what I wanted. No people, no distractions. The hike in was peaceful. The trees were thick, towering above, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked most of the afternoon sun. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, just the rustling of leaves, the occasional snap of a branch, and my own steady breathing. By the time I reached my campsite, the sun was dipping low. I set up my tent near a small clearing by a creek, the soft gurgling of water a perfect backdrop for the night. Everything felt right. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick around me. I made a small fire, cooked a quick meal, and sat back to watch the flames dance. The darkness settled in fast, the way it does in the wild. My only light came from the fire and my flashlight, the forest beyond just a black wall of shifting shadows. I should have felt at peace, but something was off. It was small at first, just a nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. I chalked it up to my brain adjusting to the solitude. I wasn't used to this kind of silence. Every crack of a branch made me look up. Every gust of wind made me listen harder. I reminded myself I was in the wilderness. Animals were everywhere. I wasn't the only living thing out here. Still, as I crawled into my tent and zipped up my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the unease. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was close. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The fire had burned low, just faint embers glowing in the pit. The forest was dead silent. Not even the usual night sounds. No crickets, no rustling leaves. Just nothing. Then I heard it. A soft crunching sound, like footsteps in the leaves. Slow, careful. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head just slightly, listening. The sound was coming from beyond the clearing, near the tree line. My heartbeat thumped in my ears as I strained to hear more. Another step, then another. I had my bear spray in the tent pocket and my knife strapped to my backpack a few feet away. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. The footsteps stopped. I waited, every muscle tensed. But after what felt like an eternity, I heard nothing more. Maybe an animal. Maybe just my imagination playing tricks on me. Eventually, Sleep took me again. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent and scanned the area. The forest looked normal. The fire pit was undisturbed. My food bag still hung from the tree, untouched. But when I walked a few feet toward the trees, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. Footprints. Not boot prints. Bare feet. Human. They were spaced far apart, like whoever it was had been moving slowly, deliberately. The prints led from the trees to the edge of my campsite and then back into the woods. I wasn't alone last night. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints. They were fresh, clear in the dirt. Not old, not washed out by rain. Someone had been here, watching me. I packed my gear fast. My gut told me to leave, but a part of me wanted to stay, to prove to myself that it was nothing. Maybe some lost hiker. Maybe just someone passing through. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. No one hikes barefoot out here. No one walks into another person's camp at night and just stands there. I made it through the second night, but I barely slept. Every sound had me gripping my knife. Every gust of wind made my skin crawl. The feeling of being watched never left me. The next morning, I was done. I packed up at first light, barely eating, barely stopping. I wanted out. The entire hike back, I felt something behind me. Never saw anything, never heard anything, but the feeling never left, like eyes pressing into my back. When I reached my truck, I threw my gear in, locked the doors, and drove without looking back. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by people. I still don't know who or what was out there. I tell myself it was just some hiker, some weirdo passing through. But those footprints, the way they circled my tent, the way they stopped just at the edge of my firelight, tell me otherwise. I haven't been camping alone since. I was looking forward to this trip for weeks. It wasn't my first time camping alone, but something about being deep in the Montana wilderness, miles from anyone, made it feel different. The thought of complete solitude, no cell service, no city noise, just me and nature. It sounded perfect. I packed light but smart. A sturdy tent, a warm sleeping bag, enough food to last 4 days, my hunting knife, a small hatchet, and a .357 revolver. Not that I expected trouble, but it was more for peace of mind. Bears and mountain lions weren't unheard of in these parts. I also brought my headlamp, a backup flashlight, and a few extra batteries. The hike to my chosen site was about 5 miles through thick forest. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The sun was warm but not scorching, and a slight breeze made the journey pleasant. I followed an old, unmaintained trail that led to a small clearing near a slow-moving creek. It was an ideal spot. Flat ground, a good water source, and enough tree cover to block the wind but still let me see the sky. After setting up my tent and getting a small fire going, I sat back on a log and took in the silence. No car horns, no voices, just the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The first night was uneventful. I cooked a small meal, cleaned up, and crawled into my sleeping bag as the fire died down to embers. The night was cold, but I slept well, waking only once to the distant sound of a coyote howling. The second day was spent exploring. I hiked up a ridge nearby, found some deer tracks, and spotted a hawk circling overhead. The peacefulness was exactly what I had hoped for. That evening, as I cooked a simple meal over the fire, I noticed the woods seemed quieter than before. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I wasn't used to the complete absence of background noise. But something about it unsettled me. That night, I woke up to a sound, a single snap of a twig. It wasn't far from my tent. My heart pounded as I lay still, listening. Then another sound, a slow, deliberate step. Something or someone was moving just outside my tent. I reached for my revolver, gripping it tightly, my finger resting near the trigger. The sound stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing. I eventually convinced myself it had been a deer or maybe even a falling branch. I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came, and I stepped outside, scanning the area. No tracks. No sign of anything unusual. I chalked it up to paranoia and went about my day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I forced myself to enjoy the last full day of my trip, even though the unease never fully left me. That night, I made sure my fire burned a little longer, hoping it would keep whatever was out there away. I lay in my tent, listening. Hours passed in silence. Then, just as I started drifting off, I heard it again. Footsteps, closer this time, slow, deliberate, human. My blood ran cold. I held my breath, gripping my revolver. The steps stopped right outside my tent. Then, a slow drag of fingers across the fabric. A deliberate motion. Someone was out there, touching my tent. I sat up, heart pounding, gun aimed at the entrance. My mind raced. Who the hell would be out here, miles from any trailhead, in the dead of night? I forced myself to act. Who's there? My voice was steady, but inside, I was shaking. No answer, just silence. Then, retreating footsteps, slow at first, then fading into the distance. I stayed up the rest of the night, weapon in hand, listening for any return. Nothing. At first light, I packed my gear in record time. As I kicked dirt over my fire, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. Footprints. Human. Leading up to my tent and then disappearing back into the trees. They weren't mine. I didn't wait to figure out who or what it was. I hiked back at double my usual pace, constantly checking over my shoulder. I never saw anyone. By the time I reached my truck, I was drenched in sweat, my heart still racing. I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe something worse. But I know one thing, I won't be camping alone again anytime soon. I had been planning this trip for months. A solo camping trip deep in the wilderness, away from the noise of the city and the demands of daily life. I wanted isolation, just me, nature, and a few days of peace. I picked a remote spot in a national forest, one that wasn't on the main trails, the kind of place where you'd be lucky to see another human for miles. The drive out was long. Hours of pavement turned into winding dirt roads, the kind that rattled your bones and made you feel every single pothole. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was already starting to dip lower in the sky. I checked my gear, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started hiking. The trail was barely a trail at all. More of a faint suggestion, just a thin break in the dense foliage. It was tough going, steep inclines, loose rocks, and thick underbrush that clawed at my legs. After about 2 hours, I found a good clearing near a small creek. It was perfect. Flat ground, fresh water nearby, and no signs that anyone had camped here before. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, and ate a simple dinner as darkness settled over the forest. That first night was uneventful. I sat by the fire, listening to the quiet hum of the wilderness. There were no cars, no distant city lights, just the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional call of an owl. It was exactly what I had wanted. When I finally crawled into my tent and zipped myself in, I felt a deep sense of peace. But that peace didn't last. The first thing that woke me up was a sound. A single sharp snap. Not wind, not a falling branch. Something deliberate. My eyes shot open and I held my breath, listening. Silence. Just the faint gurgle of the creek nearby. I told myself it was nothing. The forest is full of noises, especially at night. I turned onto my side and forced myself back to sleep. The next day, I explored the area. The creek led to a small waterfall about half a mile downstream. The water was ice cold, but I splashed some on my face, enjoying the crisp, untouched feel of it. I spent the day wandering, gathering firewood, and just soaking in the quiet. That second night, I heard the sound again. A snap, closer this time. My skin went cold, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I strained to hear more, but all I got was silence. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a deer, maybe something smaller, but the feeling in my gut said otherwise. I didn't sleep well that night. Every little noise made me flinch. The usual sounds of the forest felt off. Too quiet in some moments, too abrupt in others. Something was out there. By the third day, I was on edge. I kept scanning the trees, looking for movement, for any sign that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, just the same untouched wilderness. That night, I made sure my fire was bigger, brighter. I sat with my back to my tent, facing the dark treeline. I ate my dinner slowly, chewing each bite carefully, listening. The unease in my stomach made it hard to swallow. And then, just as I was about to turn in for the night, I saw it. Movement, not an animal, something bigger, just a flicker of motion between the trees, barely visible in the dim light of my fire. My body locked up. I waited. The fire crackled. A breeze whispered through the trees. Nothing. Maybe it was my nerves. Maybe I was imagining things. I forced myself to breathe, to think rationally. I wasn't in danger. I was fine. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I crawled into my tent but left my knife close by. Sleep came in broken, uneasy waves. Then, at some point in the dead of night, I woke up again. No sound this time, just a feeling. I wasn't alone. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my flashlight. I clicked it on, shining it through the thin fabric of my tent. Shadows stretched and twisted. My pulse pounded. And then I heard it, breathing. Not mine, not an animal's. Slow, steady, human breathing just outside my tent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. The breathing was right outside, inches from where I lay. Then the zipper of my tent moved. Just the faintest tug. Slow, deliberate. Every muscle in my body screamed to do something, anything. But I stayed frozen. Then, just as slowly as it started, the zipper stopped moving. The breathing faded. And after what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps retreat into the forest. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife with white-knuckled hands. The moment the sun came up, I packed up my camp as fast as humanly possible. I didn't eat. I didn't rest. I just shoved everything into my bag and started hiking. The entire way back, I kept checking over my shoulder, looking, listening. The woods felt different now, less peaceful, more like something was watching me. I made it back to my car, threw my gear in the trunk, and locked the doors the second I was inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, gravel crunching under my tires as I peeled out of there. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I wasn't alone in those woods, and I never will be again.